Hello! This video is actually being filmed quite far in the future compared to the videos that you're seeing right now on my channel. The stuff I'm releasing right now is, I have quite a hefty backlog of the Cosmere videos. So this is actually me, I believe, probably around a month and a half or 2 months after filming that previous video that you might have seen on Wednesday. Um, but but this is a much more time sensitive issue since it is a show that's coming out right now. So I figured I'm gonna sort of not stick to my normal video schedule, and instead I'm gonna talk about this right now. So let's talk about the first two episodes of Amazon's Rings of Power show. I Okay, so some disclaimers right at the start. Disclaimer number one: I did not go into this with very high expectations. Um, I've been burned by Amazon before. I had my fair share of issues with the Wheel of Time show, to the extent that I just stopped making videos about every episode right before the end of the season because I just didn't want to put that much negativity onto this channel. Um, so I have uh, I have my fair share of gripes with how Amazon has adapted stuff in the past. Um, but to be clear, it's not just Amazon. I also have a lot of issues with, for example, The Witcher show. In general, I feel like the fantasy adaptations we're getting nowadays have been dubious. So that's disclaimer number one. I went into this with an open mind and tried and wanted to be as charitable as I could, but I did not go into this expecting something great. I expected something decent at best. Whether I got that, I'll say in a moment. The second thing is, when it comes to this show in particular, I do not care about book accuracy in terms of plot at all. This is the Silmarillion. The Silmarillion is barely a plot. Like, the Silmarillion is just a list of events, and most of them are mythological and over the top and not. I mean, they're interesting, but they weren't really made to be adapted into a story like this. So as far as I'm concerned, they can change the timeline and the sequence of events however they want, as much as they want in this. Um, I know some people might take issue with that. Uh, I don't. So don't expect me to at any point be like, oh, I don't. They changed this, and that is inherently a bad thing. Frankly, I won't even notice how much they changed because it's been so long since I've read the Silmarillion. Like, if this was Lord of the Rings, we'd have a different story. But for the Silmarillion, I neither know that well nor care at all about plot accuracy in this show. What I do care a lot about is tonal accuracy, thematic accuracy, character accuracy, aesthetic accuracy to the works of Tolkien. I think Tolkien's works have a really specific vibe, I guess, which the Lord of the Rings movies, for example, captured perfectly for the medium that they are in, of course. Christopher Tolkien's criticisms notwithstanding, and which, for example, the Hobbit movies missed entirely. So that's also something I'm going to be looking out for in this show. So with those disclaimers out of the way, actually, one other disclaimer. I am, if you are unfamiliar with my channel, I am politically quite far left and also tend to go for very political analyses of works of fiction. So if you are someone who has an issue with the racial diversity of this show, or changes to the gender roles compared to what a guy wrote 100 years ago, you probably won't like what I have to say, because I think all of those are good things. And I also won't talk about them that much because I just don't find them particularly relevant. Uh, so, let's talk about what I actually thought about these two episodes. Overall impression, shockingly good. Like, I do have issues and I'll talk about them, but I am actually kind of looking forward to the rest of this show now. I went into this not expecting much, and now I expect more. So in a way, the rest of this show will have more to live up to in my eyes. But so that might work against it when it comes to my review of the remaining episodes. But for these two episodes, they exceeded my expectations. The first one is better than the second one. I do have more, not necessarily issues, but the second one just didn't impress me as much as the first one. But overall, a pretty strong showing. This is a good, so far, a good fantasy show. Um, as for whether it's a good adaptation, we'll get into that more later. I've already talked about how I don't care about the plot, though, so, you know. As far as getting the vibes right, I guess, of Tolkien's work, it's a bit of a mixed bag. There are some things that I think they got really right. There are some things that felt a bit off, but overall, I think it leans more towards the Lord of the Rings movies than the Hobbit movies, which is very good, both in terms of writing and in terms of visuals and aesthetics. One of the concerns I had going into this show was actually the visuals, because the trailers were a mixed bag. And I was reminded again of the Wheel of Time, which also had very mixed bag trailers, where some stuff looked great and some stuff looked really bad. And then the show came out, and yeah, it turned out that the show kinda didn't look great. I'm very happy to say that, at least as far as I'm concerned, that is not the case here. The show, for the most part, looks fantastic. The CGI, when it's used, is used well. The special effects look great. The practical effects look amazing. I do wish they used more practical effects than they actually do. But then again, I always wish there were more practical effects in everything. I'm just a big practical effects guy. But they do use them more than I was worried they would, which is good. The costuming is mostly great. I have a couple of gripes with the costuming, though, and okay, so I would say, 3 big issues with the costuming. Let's start with the most minor and irrelevant thing. The armor that Galadriel and her squad wear when they're being crowned with the laurels and when they're being sent off to the Undying Lands, to Valinor, looks weird. Now, this is meant to be ceremonial armor. It's not meant to actually be armor in terms of its function. And we can tell this because they wear completely different armor when they're actually on a mission, when they're acting as soldiers in the field, and that armor looks fantastic. No notes. Just great work. The ceremonial armor, however, looks weird, and the reason it looks weird is that it's really plain. And that feels off because elven armor is super ornate, always, like, both in this show and in the Lord of the Rings movies. Like, it's been pretty clearly established as like a visual element of this world that elven armor tends to be very ornate. It tends to be gilded, engraved, and so forth. What the hell just happened with the color grading of this video? I don't know, but I guess it's fine. I'm just more pink now. Okay. Yeah, so that particular armor, like the ceremonial armor they wear, just looked off to me because it was so plain. It's not a big deal. It was just two scenes, and it didn't break my immersion because it looked like it fit in the world. It just felt just not quite pretty enough, I guess, for what it was. Um, but that's a minor gripe. A more a bigger gripe, however, is I have issues with some elements of the aesthetics of both the dwarves and the elves. For the dwarves, I feel like that is one area where they might be leaning more towards the Hobbit films than the Lord of the Rings films in terms of aesthetics. The dwarves are a bit over the top, a bit cartoonish and silly sometimes, and they've also given all of them really big noses, which has some troubling racial connotations, but that's been written about and talked about by so many people about so many different fantasy settings that I'm not going to get into the racial coding of dwarves in fantasy. Let's just say there's some baggage there, and this show does not seem aware of that. Anyway, the overall look of the dwarves is just a bit too over the top cartoonish for me. I like the way Disa looks, although I wish she had a beard. I think anyone who makes female dwarves without beards is a coward, and I wish that this show wasn't made by cowards. But unfortunately, it appears that it is. Um, that's it for the dwarves, though. Everything else about them looks great. Like the city looks great, Khazad-dûm, everything looks great. Just their faces and beards and hair and stuff looks a bit too much. Um, and for the elves, it's a smaller issue, but a more like one that just personally bothers me more because I just really don't like how it looks, and that is the hairstyles of all the male elves. So I think the Tolkien and the color grading is back. Now I'm yellow again. Okay. So I believe the Tolkien elves should all have super long hair. That is that is a firm belief I hold. All dwarves should have long beards, regardless of gender. All elves should have long hair, regardless of gender. So already there, I don't like the decision to give them short hair. But if you're going to give them short hair, please do it better. The hairstyles of Elrond and Celebrimbor are so distracting. They just do not fit into the setting. They do not fit into Middle Earth. It's like the one element of costuming that feels like it just does not fit into this setting to me. And I'm just really unhappy with it. Maybe it'll grow on me as the show goes on. Maybe, like, I've already sort of started to get used to Elrond looking the way he does. Uh, maybe he'll grow on me fully, and maybe I'll start to be able to tolerate Celebrimbor, but currently, that particular hairstyle that both of them basically have, like, it's basically the same hairstyle, is really weird to me and does not feel like it fits with this setting. Um, so other than those costuming gripes, though, the vast majority of this show looks fantastic. Um, like I said, I love the use of practical effects. CGI, when it is used, is almost always done well. There were a few wonky shots, I feel, in like the very first sequence where Galadriel and her crew are fighting the troll. Uh, the troll, who I'm pretty sure was fully CGI. There were a few shots where it was a bit too obvious that it was CGI to me. But other than that scene, actually, there's one other moment, which is when Gil-galad, I believe it was, picks up the leaf and sees like the black stuff crawling all over the leaf, and there's like this visual effect of darkness around the edges of the screen that looked really bad. But you know, these are minor moments. Like the original trilogy had its fair share of weird shots, like the faces interposed when Elrond is speaking to Frodo. Um, So I'm not that bothered by that. It's not nearly as egregious as some of the stuff in Wheel of Time or The Witcher. Um, so yeah, that's it for the visuals, really. Mostly fantastic with a few minor issues. Let's talk about the plot and characters, though. So, and I'm pink again. Okay. So the plot is building up to something interesting, I think. There's several threads I find interesting. I'm not going to talk about the characters too much yet, other than to say that I'm still not sold on what they're doing with Galadriel. I I'm having some trouble seeing the line connecting this version of Galadriel to the version of Galadriel in the Third Age. Um, I don't I don't know if we're going to see her character develop into that version of Galadriel over the course of the show, or if they've just decided to kind of retcon her whole vibe. Um, I don't hate it if they have. I just do wish they hadn't done it with Galadriel and instead used an original character. Um, because it just doesn't feel right for Galadriel to be this like soldier veteran essentially. Uh, just doesn't strike me as the right thing for specifically Galadriel. Maybe they could have used her daughter and then had like the budding romance with Elrond. Um, anyway, that's an irrelevant thought. So yeah, other than Galadriel, most of the characters are fine. Um, I do have some character based, well, not necessarily just writing based in general, issues with the Arondir and Bronwyn storyline. So I said that overall the show's vibes were right. Like it has the right tone, it has the right kind of humor and the right amount of humor for a Middle Earth story. It it has the right amount of gravitas to the dialogue. And I think that's true for Galadriel's storyline and Elrond's storyline and the Harfoot storyline, but I don't think it's true for the Arondir Bronwyn storyline. I can't quite put my finger on it yet. I might have to rewatch the episodes before I can say that for sure, but something about this storyline felt, well, it felt more like every other show that exists on the planet right now than it felt like something that you could only do in Middle Earth. There's just a bit something tropey and generic about the dialogue between those two, and between Arondir and his friend. Uh, I don't know. I just don't love that whole. The dynamic between them is off. And Arondir is just super uninteresting as a character to me, and so is Bronwyn. Frankly, like both of them just aren't as interesting characters as the rest of the cast so far. I'm hoping that changes. Um, Now let's talk about. Really, there's very little plot so far. These two episodes are mostly setup, which makes sense. So I'm gonna just focus on a couple of major. I'm yellow again. I'm gonna focus on a couple of major moments and sort of things I have some theories about. So, uh, there's a couple of questions here. The first question is the most obvious, which is who is the stranger? The second question is what do the dwarves have that they're hiding from the elves that's glowing in that box? The third question is what's going on with Bronwyn's son and the creepy sword? Um, is that everything I have to ask so far? I think it might be. I mean, I could also ask like, oh, what's Celebrimbor making the forge for? But we know what Celebrimbor's making the forge for. I mean, if you know who Celebrimbor is in Tolkien's lore, like we know why he's making the forge, so that's not like a mystery. That's a mystery for completely new viewers, I suppose. Um, so let's talk about those three things that I just mentioned. I'm going to start with the one I have the least thoughts about, which is what do the dwarves have? I don't think it's the rings. The first gut thought that I had when I saw that was, oh, they already have the 7 dwarf rings. But no, I don't think that quite works. I think they have to help build the forge first so that the rings can be made. Again, I'm kind of shaky on the lore. It's possible that the dwarf rings were made first and completely separately from the other rings of power, but I don't think so. I don't think any rings of power exist yet. I don't think so. The other option for what that could be is the Arkenstone, although I'm not sure how that could be relevant. But I think it's too early to be 100% sure what's in that box. So, moving on to the next thing, which is Bronwyn's son, Theo. Side note, I'll get back to that in a moment. This kid's voice is so incongruous with his appearance. He looks like a 13-year-old at most. And he sounds like a 40-year-old who's been smoking 2 packs a day for the last 20 years. Puberty hit this kid hard. Specifically his voice. And it is kind of distracting. Every time he speaks, I have a moment of oh god, that's what he sounds like, right? Anyway, that's not a criticism of the show. That would be a mean thing to criticize. It's just the actor's voice. I'm not gonna criticize him for sounding the way he sounds. It is just an odd moment whenever he speaks, though. So, he's got some kind of evil sword. The only evil swords I know of in this setting are Morgul blades, and that doesn't look like a Morgul blade, and it also doesn't look like, and also I don't think the Morgul blades should exist yet. So whatever that sword is, either it's something from the Silmarillion I've forgotten, or it's something new that they've made up for the show. It has Sauron's glyph on it, which kind of makes me think that maybe the sword is going to be a way for Theo to be controlled by Sauron or something going forward, but I don't know necessarily where we're going with that. I'm also super confused about the scene of how he gets it. I didn't understand whose barn that was and why that person had the sword. I should rewatch that scene because I am really confused about that. I do understand how Theo got the sword. I don't understand what that location was or why that sword was there. Okay, that's I don't really have anything else to say about Theo. The real juicy mystery for the show is obviously the identity of the stranger. And my first and most obvious thought, which I think a lot of people had when he first crashed at the end of episode 1, was, oh, it's Sauron. Because Sauron is supposed to come to the people of Middle-earth in disguise and sort of seduce them, essentially. But as episode 2 carried on, I became more and more convinced that was very much not the case. Now, I cannot quite tell which direction that comet came from, because when I was watching, I for some reason just assumed that comet was traveling east to west. But I now realize that there's nothing that necessarily indicates that, and I just, for some reason, just assumed that. So, it could also be traveling from the west to Middle-earth. And If it's traveling east to west, I don't know what it might be, but if it's traveling west to east, that brings me to my current leading theory as to the identity of the stranger. I think the stranger is going to be one of the wizards. Maybe Gandalf, probably not. More likely Radagast. Definitely not the blue wizard, since they're supposed to come in pairs. Like, they're supposed to be together always. And almost certainly not Saruman, because that would just be kind of a weird choice, I think. So I think this might be Radagast being sent by the Valar to Middle-earth. I don't know how lore accurate that is. I don't know if this is the right period of history for the wizards to come to Middle-earth. But as I've said before, I don't necessarily care if it is accurate. I just care if it ends up telling an interesting story. And if this is one of the wizards, that could be really cool. He does seem to have something of an affinity for nature, which would work for being Radagast, but also all the fireflies died at the end. And it wasn't really clear from that scene if that was something he did or something that he was trying to prevent. That scene was kind of weird and confusing. But yeah, that's my prediction for who he is. Leading candidate Radagast. Second place, any of the other wizards, really. Third place, still possibly Sauron, but I don't think so. And those are really all of my theories, because it can't really be anyone else, I think. He has to be a Maiar, because, like, he fell from the sky. He's not a person. He's a Maiar. Or a Maya. I don't know what the... Is the singular of Maiar Maya? Or is Maya the plural of Maiar? I'm not sure. He's a lesser god, basically. He could also be Tom Bombadil, but that would be super weird. If they've chosen to include Tom Bombadil, but then also give him a backstory and like an origin, that would be such a major misstep and so obviously missing the point and appeal of that character that I hope they're not that stupid and they wouldn't do that. So, do I have any other random thoughts about the show so far? I'm trying to think. I don't necessarily think I do. I think I've covered pretty much everything I've thought of so far. Suffice to say, I'm digging the show. I have a few concerns. I have some things that I maybe would have done better but differently if I had been in charge. But so far, it looks like, at least creatively, I don't know how well the show is doing financially, but at least creatively, it kind of seems like Amazon's massive investment in this show might be paying off more than it did with Wheel of Time. Here's hoping that the remaining 6 episodes are good, and that I am going to want to keep recording videos about it and not quit halfway through the way I did with Wheel of Time. By the way, I will still be making videos about Season 2 of the Wheel of Time, at least at first, because I do think there might be potential for a fix there, but we'll see how that goes. Yeah, so, that's everything I have to say about these 2 episodes. You will be seeing me on Wednesday, but that will be me from the distant past. I will be seeing you next week for the next episode of Lord of the Rings. Not Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power. This show has a bad name, by the way. I just don't like the name The Rings of Power. I wish they'd called it something else. Okay, so, see you next week then. Bye!